Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Taylor Fazio. I am the Wellness Advisor here at the Lanby, and today's Lanby community session is going to be all things sleep. As you guys most likely know, sleep is an area that I am super passionate about, as I find it to be one of the fundamental things that create good health. It informs not only your appetite and nutrition, but your mood, your energy levels, performance, and so many other facets of health, which we'll dive into today. I'm going to be going through this presentation that touches on not only the science of sleep, but ends with some practical tips and tricks that you can take from this presentation to apply to your daily life to ideally optimize your sleep. And if you're someone that already has pretty good sleep, you'll benefit from it just as much as someone that's struggling with sleep, either getting to bed or staying asleep or both. So to outline today, we'll explore the incredible impact of sleep on our minds and bodies and why it's crucial and fundamental to biological function. Just a rough outline of what sleep is, how much do we need and why, factors that impact our sleep and sleep quality, consequences of poor sleep or not getting enough consistently. We'll discuss lightly wearables and trackable metrics, how to improve your sleep. I'll provide you with some resources and then end with a discussion. So the reason that this is such an important topic is we're kind of in a sleep crisis in this country. We have lives that are stressful. We are exposed to unnatural light at times of day in which we should be in darkness, and everyone is kind of running on E. So I think this applies to truly everyone. What sleep is a complex physiological process that occurs in cycles with distinct stages throughout the night. I kind of colloquially think of it as the best insurance policy you can invest in. It's a period of rest when our body does a maintenance check. So think of it as rebooting your computer. You reset your hormones, you repair, you recover, you realign and reset. And that includes not only muscular things, but hormones and a fascinating process of complex systems that occurs when we are unconscious. Sleep is actually a major determinant of good health. It is independently linked to chronic diseases such as metabolic syndrome, sleep apnea, and much more. And without good quality sleep, our system declines, just as a computer would. If you're running on E, systems slow down. Sleep plays a huge role, like I said, in physical health, immune function, mental health, heart health, metabolic health, and cognitive function. So pretty much every system of our body. So breaking down what sleep is, I really want us to focus on circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm is so important because it is kind of the controller of when we go to sleep and wake up. It's an internal 24-hour clock that creates a day and night rhythm based on certain hormones and external cues that either wakes us up or keeps us drowsy to go into a natural sleep cycle. The graph that is on this page shows those hormones that I mentioned, but also some other biological processes like body temperature that change throughout the day. Our circadian is so fascinating, and one of the resources that I'll provide at the end is a book on circadian rhythm because I nerded out early last year on this, and it's so fascinating that it's not just your sleep-wake cycles that circadian controls, but actually responds directly to our organs in our body. So think of your GI tract, your liver function, pretty much every area of the brain too. So that implies that it informs hormone regulation, our mood and emotions, and like I mentioned, core body temperature, which when we talk about wearables is one of those data points that's really fascinating to monitor. I also wanted to highlight something called adenosine. So adenosine is what we consider sleep pressure. It is a molecule that progressively builds throughout the day and causes us to be drowsy at the end of the day. So it's cleared when we go to sleep, and so we wake up, we're feeling refreshed, and adenosine's at its lowest, and at the end of the day, it's at its highest. That's why sometimes if you take a nap midday, you kind of hit the reset on adenosine and you begin to feel more restored, and it's more difficult to fall asleep sometimes at the end of the day. Once we get into caffeine and its impact, I want us to remember this word and term adenosine. So we talked about circadian rhythm and we talked about what sleep is and how it has stages. Everyone probably knows the term non-REM sleep and REM sleep, but I wanted to break it down just so we have an idea of what those actually mean. So think of it in 4 phases that occur around 90 minutes, about 3 to 4 times per night, depending on the duration of your overall sleep. So we have the first cycle, which is you being awake and kind of transitioning into being awake to falling asleep. You can see this on your wearable metrics as something called sleep latency. It typically takes about 5 to 10 minutes for someone to fall asleep in a healthy pattern. Some people, if you're exhausted, will fall asleep really quickly. And I hear that often. I fell asleep in about a minute right when my head hits the pillow. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, people that either run anxious or are impacted by caffeine or other things that are keeping them up will have a longer sleep latency, and that stage 1 awakeness non-REM cycle. The second phase is your light sleep. This occurs for stage 1 and stage 2. This is when we start to see our body responding. So our muscles begin to relax, our respiration or breathing slows, our heart rate decreases, and our body temperature drops. So again, our body's kind of preparing us to go into this restful state. Then the final 2 stages are, in my opinion, the coolest. It's your deep sleep phases. This is when your slow wave occurs. The third stage is that deep sleep, non-REM sleep. And again, more physiological changes of your blood pressure decreasing, your body promotes muscle growth. So certain hormones are being released at this point, like testosterone and human growth hormone. Then we have this beautiful brain flush that happens called the glymphatic pathway. So I think of it as hitting, again, that hard reset on your brain or your computer system in the middle of the night. This occurs when we're fasted and we're fully asleep during the stage 3, stage 4. Then we get to REM sleep. REM sleep is rapid eye movement, and that means that your eyes are following this horizontal pathway back and forth. And this is when we typically see the most occurrence of dreams and getting the most rest. Your respiration actually increases at this point. Your heart rate increases. Your regulation of body temperature turns off. And what the coolest thing is, or cool in terms of how you look at it, is you're completely paralyzed. So at this point, you are not active as it relates to your muscles. Your autonomic nervous system, how you breathe and all of that still is functioning. But it's really such an important part of sleep because this is the time in which we store memories. We have a cognitive benefit of learning and problem solving. And that's why if you get into the weeds of sleep, how sometimes, or of dreams, this is sometimes the most highlighted form of stages of sleep, but they are all important. The cool thing is these transition over the course of the night of how much sleep per stage and per chunk of these cycles occurs. I'm not going to get into the weeds of it, but it's really important. And again, if you nerd out with your wearable devices or want to know more about the timing of all your phases, that's one of those feedbacks. So you can directly kind of optimize for whatever stage of sleep that you are suffering from, or just want to kind of get better numbers on. All right. So how much sleep? The $1 million question is, how long do I need to be in bed to kind of reap all the benefits of sleep? Typical optimization is around 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. I do caveat at the bottom here that sleep timing changes throughout our lifespan. So think about an infant. They spend nearly 90% of their life asleep. And then comparatively, it switches when we're in our childhood, adolescence, and adulthood, and then switches again at our, later adulthood, more mature cycle of life. The benefit of actually netting out this amount of sleep, we'll talk about quality later, is that getting enough hours of sleep helps with your metabolic health. You have better blood sugar management when you actually get this amount of sleep. You can regulate your hunger and appetite. A hormone called leptin actually is rebalanced when we have enough sleep. It supports our mood, our immune health, mental health, cognitive function, performance, and metabolic resilience. So think about taking a red-eye flight and you get off of that flight, you're more likely to be kind of emotionally on edge. You might just eat whatever you want because you're already thrown off. And then you might not feel your best. You're definitely not going on a 5K run right after you hop off a red-eye flight. Think about that in an acute phase of when you're not getting enough sleep at night. So I think it's a really nice thing to think about the jet lag effect. And you could be doing this to yourself even when you're not on an airplane if you're not allotting enough time in a night. The other thing is rebalancing hormones. So your sex hormones, which I mentioned earlier in the phases of sleep, are actually released at certain points in the night. So if you're not getting enough sleep, or like I said, we'll touch on the quality of sleep, you might not be rebalancing your hormones or even secreting enough of certain hormones to kind of go through those repair processes or assist in the synchronicity of all our hormones in our body. All right, factors that impact sleep. So caffeine is an obvious one. I mentioned adenosine earlier. So the reason that caffeine plays a role is because adenosine, that kind of sleep pressure molecule, is bound by caffeine when we consume anything with caffeine in it, and it's kind of muted. So think about it. You have your first cup of coffee. There's not much adenosine early in the day because your sleep pressure hasn't needed to build after a good night's rest. But let's say you have that cup of coffee around 6 p.m. Your adenosine receptors are built up, but now they're bound by this caffeine molecule. So we will perceive to not be tired. So it's actually the thing I counsel a lot of Lanby members on, and you might be hearing this again for the second time, is that caffeine doesn't stimulate wakefulness. It just mutes fatigue. So you're kind of just making your biological processes of needing sleep be quieted, which is a really important note. Overall, I'm a big proponent of caffeine. I will not take away my morning cup of coffee, but I always recommend being strategic about caffeine timing. The important thing to know is that caffeine has about a 5 to 6 hour half-life, meaning that it is metabolizing in your system for up to 10 to 12 hours. So let's pull this back a bit. Think about your first cup of coffee. Let's say you have it at 8 a.m. Well, you actually could be metabolizing it by 8 p.m. if you are kind of more sensitive to caffeine. And that's why that cup of coffee around 12 or 1 might seem pretty benign, but there is a subconscious way that you could be impacting the quality of your sleep by having that later in the day caffeine. So if you really wanted to optimize your caffeine intake and look at timing, I put in an easy kind of rule here. Subtract 10 to 12 hours from your ideal bedtime, and that's when you should limit your caffeine intake. Everyone is different as it relates to caffeine sensitivity. I know some people that can do an espresso shot right before bed and sleep great. So just know yourself. And if you want to optimize for caffeine, keep that in mind. The other thing I want to note on here is there are sneaky sources of caffeine, specifically dark chocolate. I have maybe more than half of my members love a piece of dark chocolate before bed, and it actually has caffeine in it. It's one of those natural sources of caffeine. And if you're someone that is super caffeine sensitive, I would consider using a different sweet treat at the end of the day if you need one, or just being mindful of how does that impact my sleep when I have some form of dark chocolate at night versus not. Other things, more obvious, things like soda have caffeine, or even more kind of in vogue or mocktails or zero proof options. Things like kin actually have some form of caffeine in it to feel that kind of like stimulant effect of, in place of the cocktail, you're going out, you want to feel awake and alert and feeling good. But just be mindful of the fact that if, again, you're sensitive to caffeine, look at the mocktails that you might be inserting in for alcohol beverages, which brings me to my second point, alcohol. Alcohol is one of the biggest factors that relates to poor quality sleep. It has a sedative effect. So it means that you might actually transition into what you think is sleep rather quickly once you have a nightcap, but you're not getting sleep, you're getting sedation, and those two are not the same thing. It decreases your overall sleep quality as you can't actually go into full rest until your body has fully metabolized alcohol out of your system. And this can even be 1 glass of alcohol. It cumulatively adds up over time. So thinking about your overall intake, and again, being strategic about alcohol intake is so important. It prevents your body from going into that REM cycle, which I waxed poetically about earlier. It is the time in which your brain resets, you learn, your memory is restored, and all that good cognitive function occurs. So we don't want to impair it by having, let's say, 1 glass of wine a night, which doesn't seem that big of a deal, but you're decreasing the quality of the stages of sleep that really inform your cognitive health, as well as some of your hormones. Again, REM regulates your emotions, your hormones, your memory, and your learning. So think about trying to optimize for, lean body mass or being really performing well at work. That 1 drink a night can actually be impacting all of those things. That being said, I'm not saying go sober. So I want to be mindful of the fact that you can have a cocktail, but again, be strategic about it. The next category is nutrition. So nutrition plays a huge role in sleep. And this is one that people actually experiment with often that I work with of, let me time my meals. Let me make sure my last bite of food is about 2 to 3 hours before bed and see how my sleep quality changes. Oftentimes the feedback I hear is, wow, I had much more restorative sleep when I had that time between last bite of food and hitting the pillow. And that's a simple, just behavioral tool. It's not even changing what you're eating. It's just when you're eating, which is super important. Again, if we think back to those pathways that occur in stages of sleep, the lymphatic pathway, what I call the hard reset of your brain, only occurs when we're fasted during sleep. So if you have a big meal and then go to bed, you're actually not getting that full cognitive benefit of the reset when you have digestion still occurring at night. Blood sugar balancing is the other thing that relates to nutrition and sleep. what I typically see is the more regulated your blood sugar, the better your sleep. And then it's kind of a feedback loop. The better your sleep, the better your blood sugar. So tackling one end or the other will support each other. But typically, it's much easier to just make sure you're having blood sugar balanced meals to support that sleep factor. Will just return on investment over and over again as you get better sleep. Unhealthy kind of standard American diets are linked to other sleep disorders like obstructive sleep apnea. So these things are kind of the end result of what happens with unhealthy diets, and obstructive sleep apnea and other issues like insomnia are obviously impairing the quality and duration of your sleep each night. Exercise is one of the other components. So movement throughout the day is one of those things that you need to make sure you're doing in order to actually kind of burn energy to need to replete it. I hear this over and over again is people who have pretty demanding desk jobs having poor sleep. It's for a myriad of reasons why those two could be connected. But one of the factors is if you're sitting at your desk all day, you're not moving and your overall activity level throughout the day is pretty low. Even adding a walk at lunchtime, taking the stairs instead of an escalator or elevator, little things like that are easy ways to increase your daily movement. And trust me, it might seem small, but it will impact your sleep. Other factors are exposure to light, mood, medication, stress, chronic conditions, like I mentioned earlier, and certain supplementation, which we'll get into. But there are tons of things that inform sleep. And I want you to see these sources and maybe pause here if you're watching this recording and take an audit of your day-to-day and which ones you can optimize for. It doesn't have to be everything. Just looking at one of these categories will truly change the quality and duration of your sleep. All right. Kind of harped on this already, but there are some consequences to poor sleep. It pretty much shifts all our hormones in our body as it relates to metabolic health. So insulin dysregulation, meaning you are more insulin resistant, increasing your likelihood for type 2 diabetes and other metabolic disorders. Appetite regulation. So sleep deprivation can disrupt the body's appetite regulating hormones, increasing hunger and decreasing fullness. And this can lead to overeating or not reaching max satiety, even in a balanced meal, which can lead to weight gain and other metabolic dysfunction. I mentioned earlier, hormone regulation. Sleep is an important factor for regulating hormones. It is not only for the sex hormones, but also cortisol, like I mentioned earlier, appetite hormones, and also just kind of the metabolic processes. You can read the stats here, but also some of the non-medical related things are you're more accident prone. So getting good sleep is actually going to make you safer in the world. It is actually a crazy statistic of how many accidents occur just because of sleep deprivation as it relates to motor vehicle accidents. So it's one of those things that if you are driving with little to no sleep, you're putting yourself into danger and of course others as well. Last but not least is the emotional regulation. Being someone who is emotionally resilient really is a factor of getting good quality sleep. Again, think about your jet lagged self and how you would respond to things of stressors or needing to effectively communicate. Those are all big roles of the hormones that reset at night. All right, so how to improve sleep. There are so many things that you can do to improve sleep, but I wanted to highlight about 7 of the easiest ones or foundational ones that, in my opinion, can really move the needle in a meaningful way. The first one is being consistent. Consistency is key to getting good sleep. Think back to your circadian rhythm. This is that natural cycle that is primed to set off certain hormones at specific times of the day. So your body knows, oh, I typically get up at this time. I'm going to begin secreting cortisol to get me out of bed and feel energized and ready to go. And inversely, I typically go to bed at this certain time. So my cortisol should be at an all-time low and my melatonin should be peaking. So I know that I'm fully tired and ready to go to sleep, amongst other cascade of things that occur within that prime circadian rhythm. So going to bed and getting up at specific times each day is really helpful. This is definitely an issue sometimes when people are like, well, on my social hours and the weekends, what do I do there? Do your best. Quality of life also includes social habits. So if on a weekday, that's when you can get the same sleep and wake times, great. Do your best. The second is optimizing your room environment. So this is a perfect activity that you could do even tonight. Looking at your room to make sure things like lighting any lights from electronics, from having blackout curtains, or any other light exposure is optimized for in your bedroom. Room temperature is so important. They say that typically around 64 degrees is optimal for sleep. Personally, that is freezing for me. And all the time I hear from couples that temperature regulation is the one sticky issue in the bedroom. My recommendation is have separate bedding. Literally have two different kind of comforters, whether someone runs hot or cold, they can kind of figure out their own temperature regulation system, but set the room temperature at a comfortable position that's on the cooler side, because your internal body temperature does need to drop at night to go into those certain phases of sleep. The other thing is just overall environment of your bed. Think about your mattress quality. This is something that you really should invest in if you can. A high quality mattress is just a return on investment as it relates to your entire health. And I'm actually going to steal this recommendation from our partners at IPA. Is they recommended the purple pillow. It is ergonomically set up to where your neck isn't strained and you're aligned when you go to sleep. So it's really comfortable for you to go to bed, and it's breathable, meaning there isn't one side, full side to the pillow. It is truly both sides. So it is a comfortable thing, and I highly recommend the purple pillow, which I'll put in my resources. The other factor is behavioral, getting light. So truly going outside and getting sunlight exposure at the beginning of your day. What light does is it turns off melatonin. So we're thinking of cortisol and melatonin early in the day working inversely. We want melatonin to kind of be at its lowest when we first wake up so we can feel alert. And one of the ways to suppress melatonin is light exposure. So getting light 2 to 10 minutes first thing in the morning will set that cascade off. And then I always recommend too, at some point midday, we all know the midday slump at offices of not feeling as energized. Going outside can actually stimulate that wakefulness in the same way. The opposite is true too. Making sure that you limit your light exposure at the end of the day so melatonin can rise so you can naturally go to sleep easier. I don't want you walking around your house in the dark. So being mindful of, you can have lights on, but maybe they're not overhead lights. Maybe you really optimize your room to have, lamps or low set lighting so it's not impacting the quality of your sleep. And pro tip, if you're someone that's prone to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, set a low level night light so you don't need to turn on overhead lights to navigate your apartment or home. I touched on the fifth one. Length is moving your body truly in any way throughout the day, whether that's formal activity or just overall being active as it relates to walking around, moving, fidgeting, anything like that. Practicing some form of stress management. This is just super key of whatever it looks like for you. Some people meditate, some people journal, some people call their mom. Whatever it looks like, make sure that when you need it, you've already incorporated some form of stress management techniques that you've been using pretty consistently to kind of ride the wave of the inevitable stress of life. And last but not least is getting off your phone. I am certainly a culprit of someone that looks at their phone right before I go to bed, but I do notice the nights in which I read a book, turn my phone off, am not on a screen, my sleep is just so much better. That blue light emission, the stimulation effect from social media or whatever we're looking at really does play a role in our sleep quality. All right, wearables. So a lot of people, especially Lanby members, love to have data behind their sleep. So I mentioned some wearables on the left side of the screen and some metrics to watch out for. So these are all things that are really nice as a feedback tool of when you do try to insert any new recommendation of how to optimize sleep, getting feedback to see if it's working or not. The one thing I will say is sleep or wearables do not take place of a formal sleep study. They are kind of just an adjunct for day-to-day function as they kind of work in two different ways. And also wearable data does not trump how you feel. If you are feeling a certain way, you feel energized, but your Whoop is telling you you're in the red, I always recommend you listen to your body and really check in with yourself that you're not dictating all of your behaviors or kind of having any health anxiety as it relates to wearable data. There is a fine line, and you should always empower yourself to listen to your internal cues because your body truly is talking to you. So listen to that over some form of external data. But for what it's worth, if you feel healthy and aligned with the wearables, they do have good feedback. All right, some resources that I love. Everyone probably knows the Huberman Lab podcast, but the Master Your Sleep episode is very thorough and goes over about 1 trillion different ways to optimize your sleep, start to finish. Matthew Walker, I feel like, came into the scene in 2020, and his book, Why We Sleep, is fascinating, more so on the title says it all of why we sleep, but also kind of gives some practical tools. I mentioned earlier the Circadian Code. It's a book by Dr. Panda, who is incredibly fascinating as it relates to the circadian and other parts of our body system, not only sleep, but also our metabolism, energy, recovery, all of that. It's one that I've recommended to a lot of Lanby members, and I highly recommend checking out. Matthew Walker actually has a masterclass. If you are a member of masterclass or want to try the free trial, it is so thorough. There are tons of modules in there that are practical and really broken down into a digestible way. And I wanted to provide some apps that are really beneficial that I've gotten feedback from Lanby members. So Nature Space and Museum of Peace and Quiet are 2 sound apps. So you can play nature noises, rain, whatever, if you need a little white noise. And Time Shifter is a great app that works if you travel often for work or leisure. It allows you to know how to optimize your kind of behaviors if you're traveling time zones. And this is a question that I get all the time. I travel often for work. What the heck should I do? Trust me, download this app and help you find certain behaviors depending on where you are in the world and what to do as it relates to caffeine intake versus sleeping and supplements. I will send this to you, but here is a long list of natural sleep remedies that I have personally tried or I've heard from Lanby members that work really well. Investing in your sleep, whether it be a sleep mask, drinking a certain tea, or getting a, sun lamp, it's always going to benefit your overall health. And it's one of those things that I find very worthy of the investment within reason. So overall, like I started off with, sleep is not a luxury. It is so important for just living a healthy, vibrant life. So let's prioritize our sleep and spread the knowledge of maybe something that you learned today. Tell a friend, tell a loved one, because a well-rested, healthier society is a happier society. I know that we all want that. Thank you so much for tuning in. You know where to find me with any follow-up questions, and I look forward to discussing this with each of you.